You know, I'm learning more and more that I really have to be intentional. I have to be intentional about what I choose to focus on and what I choose to listen to. And I cannot just simply accept or receive what the energies are around me, what people are saying around me, what the news is saying around me, what even in my own mind I may be saying to myself. I really have to be more intentional about making sure that I am listening to spirit rather than form. Listening to the spirit, the soul, rather than this material form or the material forms that we see all around us. Shouldn't that be natural, though? What we're going to do is look this morning at one of the 39 parables that Jesus talks about in the Scriptures. We're going to focus on one of them, and we're going to apply it to what we've been talking about for those of you that have not been with us. And if you watch this on Facebook or YouTube, you'll see that you cannot see this sphere that I'm pointing to. As I was watching it this week, I thought, all you see is me pointing somewhere, and people don't really see what it is. But it is a sphere, a white globe that is lit up to signify our Creator, our Designer, the intelligent Maker behind all that is. And as we think about that, wouldn't it be natural that if that is God, and God is Spirit, and Scripture says God is Spirit, then what would we be? If we've come from God, and if God is Spirit, then what are we? Right, that wasn't too difficult, was it? So we're going to really focus on, and hopefully I will have said things enough and repetitive. I'm saying things over and over again because we're so used to thinking of ourselves solely as the form, this body, the aging process, our health. We're known by who our children are, what our job is, and all of life seems to be associated with this form. But there's more to you than this form. Just there's more to God than the material, the physical that you see, the mountains, the streams. There is more to God than the form. There is God the Spirit, which was really what all of the form came out of. Before the form was, it was a thought. Before God created in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens. Before the material was created, God was. God has always been. He is eternal. So if you came out of God, then you are spirit and you are eternal. Now here's the first parable. A parable is a story that can often only be taken at a initial level or dimension. In other words, you read through it and you think, oh, I know what that means. But when Jesus spoke, He spoke in parables. There's at least 39 of those that are recorded in the Scripture. This is the first one in Matthew 5 that Jesus talks about. And when He's talking about a parable in those days had multi-dimensions. It did mean something on the surface, but there were many levels to the parable. Now, when you read this parable that Jesus is talking about in Matthew 5, this is what it says: you are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. Sounds pretty obvious. It's a surface meaning. We're going to talk about that, but we're going to also talk about the deeper dimensions to this parable. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. That's pretty self-explanatory. You can see in this parable that Jesus is saying that the moral or the value that you exhibit is better seen than it is heard. And it's understood when it is seen, not just when it's heard. That's the surface meaning of this story. That's the meaning that most of us, maybe that's the only meaning we've ever really talked about. And it goes on to say, instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, that everyone will praise your Heavenly Father. Initially, that is a story where Jesus is saying that on the surface level, you don't want to hide a light under a bushel. you want that light to be seen, and for it to be seen, you have to put action to your words. Now, there's no way that that is the only meaning to that story, because one word that is used there, light. The word light, both Old and New Testament, means many things. It especially is a reference to the soul. So if we were to look at this parable of Jesus, the first of 39 that he taught, that he shared with, we would be looking at this as Jesus trying to help us kind of go back to our title. Just who are you, form or spirit? So I am proposing to you that Jesus in this story, this parable, is trying to get us to a deeper dimension understanding that you have a soul that is often covered up by the bushel of the form. And the beauty of the soul is often not seen because of the bushel that covers the form, that covers the soul, which is the form. And Jesus was clearly articulating to His disciples that this is where I want you to live from. Not from your form, but from your soul. I want you to, when you refer to yourselves, I want you to think about who you are at a deeper level. I don't want you just to refer to yourself as Jeff or Levi or Hope or whatever your job is or whatever your background is or whatever your culture is. Those are all exterior things of who we are in our form. But there is something that all of us go back to, and that is spirit. We all go back. And the deeper dimension to you that Jesus is referring to is your spirit. So we are really trying to hit this issue very hard in the sense that we want you to be able to really be able, as you go through a day, to start thinking, what was that? Am I kind of looking at form, or am I looking at spirit? Am I giving a judgment on a situation based upon a form, or am I giving... The reality is that there is something deeper. You know, I've been catching myself. I've honestly not realized how judgmental of a person that I have been. Whether it's the way someone dresses or the attitude they present. It seems like prior to this part of my life, I would look at something or a situation, I would say, oh, I know why they're that way. Or yeah, I know why that happened to them. And that is really speaking almost literally, I look back, now that's nonsense. That's just on a form level. It's on a material level. And I'm starting to notice and become aware that is not what God is asking me to do. He's not asking me to discern where they've been or what they've done. He's asking me to accept others as spirit because I am spirit, because He is spirit. Because in all of people there are spirit. He's asking me, Jeff, to receive and to love others as spirit and to look deeper and to realize that their behavior isn't really their behavior at a spirit level. Their behavior is a behavior at the level of a form or material. And really the reason they're behaving the way that they are is because of the stories that they've believed about themselves or about life. But when they hear the story that we've been talking about, that everyone comes from the Spirit and God is Spirit and we all are Spirit, things then begin to change. So Jesus talks about this. And we're going to dive into this deeper today, into this deeper dimension to ourselves, where there is a knowledge that is there intuitively, that really doesn't even need the reading knowledge necessarily that we feel like we need sometimes. I need to know more. Usually when we say we need to know more, we're saying we need to read another book or we need more education with information. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But the reality is there is an intuitiveness about every one of us that is God-given to you, that is because you are spirit. If you are spirit, you have you've just never been taught to trust it. You just never realize it's a part of your spiritual breath. It's a part of your spiritual being, is an intelligence. We're going to talk about that throughout this morning. So if we came from the Spirit, then we must be Spirit, every one of us. And the more we can kind of dive into this, the more we're going to learn about ourselves, not as form, as Jeff, but as spirit, child of God, son and daughter of God, and what that means to be connected to God in spirit, not the physical. You know, it's amazing. God's given it. Science is on the cutting edge of kind of almost helping us out in this. I was driving to the west side of the city this week. I had a doctor's appointment and I had a procedure done, and as I did, I had a device that I had to wear all week long on my belt. And but on the way there, I wasn't really sure which direction I wanted to go, whether I wanted to stay on the expressway or whether I wanted to go into the city on the expressway. And so I followed my GPS. You know, I must tell you, I had total confidence in the GPS. Why did I? Because I believe in the technology behind it. I've seen that most of the time they work. There are some glitches, and they can kind of get you in the wrong direction sometimes. But for the most part, you trust. What was amazing to me and what really hit me is, in spite of the fact that I was inside of a car, and I could put my hand on that car and I could say, I can't go through that car. It is a barrier, so I can't go through that. However, the GPS goes through that. I drove behind tall skyscrapers, and even though they were in front of me, and if you were to try to see me from the lake looking to where I was at, you would not be able to see me because there were physical barriers. But the amazing thing about a GPS, it works off of a whole different dimension of wavelengths and of technology that I could not explain to you today. That is beyond form, that goes through form, that goes through the body, that goes through buildings as if it wasn't even there. So why we're trying to learn about this is so we can begin to learn, starting to identify living from the Spirit versus living from the form. And we can start noticing when we're living in one and when we're living in the other. We can start recognizing, man, now that was not a comment that the Spirit would make. That is not an outlook that I think the Spirit would have. That is more of a comment that the form would make, the material would make. And we catch ourselves. And it becomes almost kind of a game in a good way. And you start catching yourself and you start recognizing when you're in the Spirit versus when you're in the form. And you start able to, and God gives you that, it's almost like this internal GPS system to help guide us. So Jesus, I believe, in this parable was talking about an intelligence that's seemingly hidden from the form. You don't necessarily see, and you've really got to slow down to see this intelligence. Because it's happening literally every day, every moment you're breathing. I mean, have you ever thought about the intelligence behind your... Let me ask you a question. Is breathing something you're doing, or is it just happening? It's just happening. You're not saying, wow, I hope I don't forget to breathe today. Okay, I hope when 4 o'clock gets here, 4:07, I've got to remember to breathe. You don't do that. It just happens. Think about your heartbeat. Is your heartbeat just happening? Or you make it happen? It's just kind of... There's an intelligence that your body has that you have nothing to do with it. It was given by our Creator. That was there in the raw material, the DNA that was there, was this intelligence that you don't even have to think about. But yet we overlook that. And I believe this is what Jesus was talking about. That when you look inward and you start seeing this amazing mechanism called the human body, you start seeing an intelligence that has been given to that mechanism by its Creator. And that has everything to do with Spirit, living out of the Spirit, living according to the Spirit. So we're learning this. Before there was form, there was Spirit. We understand Genesis 1. And I want to clarify something. I really, when we're talking about ego, we're not talking about somebody that stands up and brags about who they are. That's really not what that is an extreme portion of but really what we're talking about is when you associate yourself with your form, you are living out of your ego. When the way you refer to yourself is an old person or a young person or a Jeff at 20 or Jeff at 40, you are referring to your form. And that is your ego. That is not, you're not referring to yourself as in your spirit. Because you are beyond your name. You are beyond your culture. You are beyond your background. You are beyond your past. You're beyond what behaviors you did yesterday. You're beyond what even behaviors you're doing now. And if you and I can tap into that, let's call it the soul. Let's call it the sanctified self. Let's call it living in the Spirit. Let's call it in Holy Ghost living. Whatever you choose, whatever title you give will be totally in order. But it's your identification with your form or the physical. But you are much more than your physical. You know, when I was just reading this week, do you know that your body literally renews itself every several days, weeks, and months? I think I was reading somewhere it takes like about 6 months for your liver to literally renew itself. It takes like 2 years for literally your lungs to renew itself. Your DNA literally over a matter of, I think, 7 years can totally be different than the original DNA. In other words, your body is constantly, you're breathing out. The body naturally gets rid of the old cells and you breathe it out. And you naturally breathe in the new cells that creates new livers, new cells. That literally, these are natural healing mechanisms that your body has been given by our Creator, but we're just maybe not aware of it. We just aren't aware of it. So when we talk about ego, it's important. We're talking about, you're thinking of the physical. Here's a good question. Do you want to be a host to God or a hostage to the ego? You have a choice. Is this body going to be a host to God or held hostage to the ego? If you're referring yourself, if you're constantly referring to yourself as your value is in your profession, your value is in the things that you have, your value is in what people think of you or what you even think of yourself, that is all about ego, an identification with your form. If we can be liberated from this, and as we are liberated by living in the Spirit, we're liberated, we start kind of almost rising above the form, and we really don't even see ourselves the way we used to see ourselves anymore. And the things that when someone would say something about us, that really doesn't bother us anymore because we're rising above that, and we know that's not who I am anyway. I'm more than that. I'm amazingly magnificent, made in the image of my Creator, according to Genesis 1:26 through 28. And I'm not an hostage. I have a choice. I do not have to be a hostage to the physical. That doesn't mean I don't experience pain. It doesn't mean I don't go through times that are depressing. It doesn't mean I don't get angry. It doesn't mean I don't get jealous. But what it does mean is I start associating those things with an identification with the ego, and that puts a check in my spirit to say, wait a minute, I can choose to be differently. I can choose to live out of the Spirit. I can choose to live according to the Spirit. What would the Spirit of God who lives in me do right now? How would it respond? All the suffering in the world is created when humans forget who they are. Every bit of suffering in our world today is a result because we have forgotten who we are. We have forgotten where we came from. We have forgotten our Creator. We have forgotten that we are spirit and we are more than this identification with the physical. We are much more. You know, I can tell you this, however, our world is consumed with the physical. We care about how the physical looks. We care about how the physical is. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong to take care of your body. But you are much more than your body. I was fascinated. Lee and I were watching a television show last night on one of the channels where you see houses being sold and flipped and that type of thing. And the newest thing now, it's called tiny houses. I don't know if you've seen it or not. And it's people who are choosing to downsize. And they're living in literally a 250 square foot house. They call it a house. It's more like a trailer or a camper, but they're paying big bucks for those on a small side scale in some cases. But I thought that was very interesting, just to see kind of a change. We want to not associate, keep in mind that we are not just the physical, but we are the spiritual. We want to remind ourselves of who we are. Things are getting worse and better at the same time. This is the great paradox of what we live in today. These are the worst of times, and these are the best of times. However, if you've noticed, the only reason that we notice the worst of times more is they get more airtime. I mean, have you ever seen a news channel? We want to tell you the positive things going on in our world today. Channel 6, you'll find out. They try to squeeze in a story every now and then. But the great paradox is that the bad gets noticed. The truth is we live in a paradox of times where it is the worst of times, but it also is the best of times. And which do you think the identification with the physical will live in? Which do you think the identification with the spirit will live in? We'll choose, intentionally look and focus on those types of things. We become identified with those things, but we are not who those things say that we are. You are not your body. You are not the clothes that you wear. You are not your children. You are not your past. You are not what someone says about you. You are not what you even say about yourself. You know, you could have the worst critiquing of yourself that anybody could have, but that is still not who you are, because you came out of source. You came out of God. You came out of an amazing Creator. So God isn't junk. You're not junk. You came from an amazing intelligence. You just simply got to start focusing your attention upon the Spirit rather than the physical side of things. And when you do, things will begin to change. Think about this. If you want to know your mother, do you just slice her up into pieces, her body, and put her pieces there, and you say, okay. Remember when you were a kid in middle school or junior high school, how many ever dissected a frog? Raise your hand. Remember dissecting that frog? That's how we would get to know the frog. We would dissect. See, the intellect, for the intellect to become knowledgeable, it dissects things. It picks things apart. Because we are kind of, there's this perception, if we do that, then we become most knowledgeable. Not realizing that there is a built-in knowledge inside of us, of our Creator, of us, who you can see an amazing Creator through us and in us. So we, just in the same way, we don't dissect our mother to learn more about her. We get to know her. We live with her. We talk with her. She talks with us. We look at her feelings, her emotions. We build a relationship. That's how we get to know our mother, not by slicing and dicing things up. We can have a false sense that we know everything, but that knowledge is mainly just information or intellectual information, but that is not the only knowing. So let's look at this knowing. This knowing. You know, when you think about this, psychology tells us that you have approximately 60,000 thoughts every day. You know what's really interesting is the next day, 95% of those thoughts are the same ones you had the day before. So we just need a whole new paradigm. We can't listen to that social conditioning, or we can't listen to what our thoughts are necessarily saying all the time. Because if we do, we're simply listening to what was said yesterday and the day before that. It's almost like our thoughts are just recycled. They're just recycled from the day before, and the day before that, and the day before that. So when you think about your thoughts, here's a good comment for you to put on your refrigerator to remember. Every thought pretends that it matters so much. Now, are you spirit or are you physical, which has your thoughts? So if you're believing every thought, you're caught up in the ego identification or the identification with the physical. And when you think about this, every thought pretends that it matters so much. Here's a new spiritual practice for you. don't take any of your thoughts too seriously. Don't take any of them too seriously, because they are not you. They may be in you, in your physical, but those thoughts are not you. Whether they even be positive or negative, those are not necessarily you. You are beyond any human being's evaluation of you. You're beyond anyone's evaluation of what value you have. Your value does not come from man. Your value comes from God. Your value does not come from the intellect of other people and what they think is good or right. Your evaluation and your value comes from your amazing designer and creator and what He says. So today, don't take your thoughts too seriously, because they're just 95% of them are the same thoughts you had yesterday. Moving beyond the thoughts. Moving beyond the physical. So we're going to spend some time in bringing this together by thinking about this amazing machine called the human body. There's this term called infinite correlation. And it simply means this, that you have the ability to do an infinite number of things at the same time. Think about this. Your body can smell, taste food, think about a philosophy, create a list in your mind of things to do for tomorrow, cast out germs, breathe, your heart beat without your assistance at all, hardly. Do you realize that the human body is the most intelligent mechanism that there is? It is so amazing that it has the ability to do these things. It is the most sophisticated mechanism on the planet. And the reason we're talking about this is because the more that you know and you see this inner intelligence, you start recognizing, wow, if this body is intelligent, then what in the world is the creator that it came from like? Amazing. I'm glad, because you know what? If you and I had to remember to breathe, we may not remember to breathe, but the body just keeps breathing. The heart keeps beating. You know, I used to laugh at this Star Trek, one of my favorite shows years ago. I always remember, the phrase, beam me up, Scotty. Do you know, we saw that as cutting edge technology, but your body does that every day. You think about it. In just a few moments, well, some of you have already done it. You went to the breakfast over there, and you ate something physical, a donut. We offer some of the most incredibly nutritious breakfast available in our area. In case you didn't recognize, I did make, personally, 10 gluten-free muffins over there. I've never made any muffins before in my life, and I made muffins, the gluten-free version. I actually ate 2 of those for myself last night when I made them, and I brought you 10 of those today. Oh, goodness. You have one in every crowd. And you eat the muffin. Watch this. You think that this would be major tech. Your body takes it, breaks it down, turns it into kidney cells, liver cells, lung cells. And you didn't have to do anything. What an amazing... And we would look at Star Trek and we would see the people molecularized, and they would kind of be transitioned from there where they were at back to the Star Trek, or from the Star Trek back to the planet wherever they were at. And you would think, wow, that's amazing. The body's been doing that for hundreds of years. We just haven't been aware of. We're caught up in the madness of the mind. And we're losing to see, we're missing out on the beauty of the intelligence that has always been. This isn't something new, I'm telling you. This has always been. It's the way God made the body. It's the way God made us. So for the spirit, you and I are we're a spirit having a bodily experience. So your spirit that has come from God is having this incredible opportunity to experience what it's like to be in a body. Your body can't hold your spirit. It can't do it. You are so much more than your body. Your body is just a portion of who your spirit is. When you look at people, you're not seeing who they really are. You're just seeing the physical of who they are. When someone passes away, the physical, you don't really see maybe the transition of the spirit that is as beautiful as it's always been, that is flawless and as ageless as it's always been. It's never. There's an ageless part of you, and that is your spirit, your soul. That is certainly not your physical or your body. However, we spend most of our life thinking about who we are, and when we do, it's merely a reference to the physical and the form rather than the spirit. The next time you look up into the sky and you see stars and you think, wow, you see it's like endless. That's really kind of that's what you and I are going to be like. But God, we've been put into a body. But one day we're going to be released from this body. And our true magnificence will really then be seen because we will be much more than that. Reconnected to our Creator, our Maker, our Designer. Wow! To know another human being, this is what I want to leave you with. What we've been talking about not only allows you to see the way you see yourself differently, but it allows you the way you see other people differently. To know another human being, we confuse knowing about with, well, I know their parents, I know their family, I know where they grew up at. That's not knowing someone. That's just knowing about someone. Knowing someone is looking beyond the form, regardless of what color, what culture. You look beyond the form and you know, where did we all come from? God. Every one of us. That's where we came from. So to know someone means you move beyond the form and beyond the physical to the formless. And you start seeing every person as spirit, not just as form. Now, they may live in this form. They may recognize this form. The only awareness they have is the awareness of this form. But you know and you see them as much more. And you make statements like this. If her past were your past, if your consciousness were her consciousness, you would behave just like she does. Wow. You know, if I had the story that they had, the likelihood of me living the way they live probably is very similar. And you start seeing people, and you have mercy and sympathy and forgiveness and an awareness that looks beyond their form. And you start recognizing that they are living from the awareness that they have. They're making decisions from the awareness of life and who they are. They're making a decision maybe from the physical because they don't even have an awareness. See, that's why Jesus says, you are the light of the world. The world will see through you what soul living is like. The world will see through you what it's like to live through the soul and the spirit, and rather than through the form or the physical. And then you will make statements like, you acted according to the level of consciousness at that time. What you did or failed to do is a manifestation of unconsciousness. In other words, you know, you're not using blame or guilt or shame. I wish I would have done this. I wish they would have done that. If I'd have only known that at that time in their life. You can't even go there, my friend. You did the best that you could with the awareness that you had. And you don't live in guilt. You don't live in... Guilt is all about the form. Guilt and shame is all about the form and the identification with the form. We recognize their behavior as a form of conditioning, and you see it and you accept it as that. My prayer for you in closing is that you and I can begin to love ourselves the way we love others, the way we love ourselves, as Jesus said. And we will not hide this light under the bushel of the form, but we will begin to let our souls be seen and the Spirit be seen. That's who we really are. Man, you can leave today wherever you go, wherever you eat, whoever you encounter. And it's really starting to get interesting. I've noticed like, I want to talk to people more. You know why? Because now I don't put up these barriers, these conditions of why maybe I feel like I shouldn't talk to them. Maybe they aren't my culture. Maybe they talk in a way I wouldn't talk. Maybe they're acting in a way I wouldn't act. But now that these barriers, now that these divisions are being torn down, and I'm seeing that they're at the deepest part of who they are, they're just like me. Tim and Tom aren't the only twins in here. In the spiritual level, we're all twins. We've all come from the same God. The world doesn't see it that way. But I believe that's what the second coming of Christ is really all about. A raising of the consciousness of humanity, where we begin to see we are all as Christ is, in the sense that we have come from God. Christ has come to reveal this to the world. And it's a part of the awakening of every culture and every tribe of seeing their connection to God. But until that day, we've got to bring the kingdom of heaven here to earth. And we are love, we are forgiveness, we are the people of God, and we practice it until that happens. Wow. Davis and I were talking about that before service today. Glad to have guys like Davis that serve our country and serve us. And you know, I was thinking about that, to have someone like him in the awareness that as he goes to battle, as he goes to war, as he fights evil, that he has an awareness, just like we're talking about, that these people are living from the awareness that they have, not the awareness that God would have them to have. What a great thing. Well, we're done. I want you to pray for Molly. Molly's got some decisions she's making, I know, with her home and transitioning. That's okay. You don't need to hear me. They hear me. She's got some decisions to make. Pray for Molly. Also, I'd like to make you... Also, what a great time we had Thursday. I want you to know something. Things like that are... that is helping me as much as this is. That is helping me as much as this is. And that is just as spiritual as this is. We just have the ideas of spirituality kind of in a form level. Spirituality is praying, a position. Spirituality is a place, a church. Spirituality, when you start seeing things like we're talking about, everything becomes sacred. Everything becomes sacred. Play is sacred. Being with your family is sacred. Going to work is sacred. Having a cookout in your neighborhood is sacred. Coming to a party at the church is sacred. We had a blast. We had a great time. There were so many new faces and new people that we're able to talk to and begin to get to know and just share with. And it was just fascinating. And we're just going to keep spreading the love of Jesus. Why don't you stand, everybody? It's the new year. Go greet someone. Tell them Happy New Year. Have a great day.